My father told me to stand aside when he chose his favorite son. He said, "Leave if you don't like it." I did. He regretted it a few weeks later. He stormed into my office, crimson in the face, eyes blazing, almost vibrating with a raw, uncontained fury. My team froze mid-call, mid-typing, the sudden silence amplified by the thumping in my own ears. All I saw was a child, flailing in a pool he'd never been taught to swim in. "You think you've won?" He snarled, the words hot and venomous. "You think this is yours now?" I just looked at him, and for the first time, felt nothing but a quiet, almost clinical understanding. 3 months before, that same quiet understanding would have been a gut punch, a twisting knot in my stomach. I was sitting across from my father in his massive mahogany office, the air thick with the scent of old leather and his expensive cigars. He was talking about family legacy, his voice a low rumble, while so almost imperceptibly he slid the knife in. "I'm Jack, 32. For nearly a decade, 9 years of my life, I'd poured everything into our family business, a logistics firm he'd built from nothing. It wasn't some flashy, high-tech startup, but it was solid, reliable, a bedrock of steady contracts, and a team so dedicated they felt like extended family. I'd started at the absolute bottom, physically hauling boxes, slogging through graveyard shifts in trucks that often felt older than me, and answering frantic calls at 2 a.m. when a driver missed a checkpoint. I loved that business. It was in my blood. Slowly, painfully, I climbed. First accounting, then logistical planning, eventually management. For the last 3 years, I'd effectively run the place. Payroll, client relations, fleet upgrades, you name it, I handled it. Dad's presence became more of a distant echo in the halls, his contributions mostly limited to a proud nod and a smile during meetings, as if he were watching his legacy come to life. I believed I was that legacy, his collaborator, his successor. Turns out I was just keeping his seat warm. And then came Monday morning, a casual request tucked into a crisp email: "Come in early, before the crew arrives." Nothing too unusual, we did that sometimes during peak season. But this time his tone felt off, less the usual collaboration, more a meticulously rehearsed script. I strolled into his office, coffee steam warming my face, and he was already there, ramrod straight, fingers laced on the polished desk, and across from him my younger brother, Brandon. 26, fresh out of college, and up until recently, far more interested in the abstract world of Bitcoin and influencer marketing than the gritty reality of freight. "Jack," Dad said, gesturing to a vacant chair, "we've been thinking about the future." I caught Brandon's eye. That crooked grin, the one he wore when he was bluffing his way through something, spread across his face. The same grin he'd given me when he forgot my birthday and blamed a calendar sync error. My stomach tightened, a slow, cold dread beginning to coil. "I want you to start training Brandon," Dad continued, his voice smooth, devoid of any real emotion. "Show him the ropes, account systems, client connections. Eventually, I'd like him to take over operations while you focus on strategy." I remember blinking, the fluorescent lights above his head shimmering. Had I heard that right? Take over operations? Like, my role? I managed to ask, my voice sounding strangely thin. Dad leaned back, a slight sigh escaping him. "Yes, you'll manage the big picture, less hands-on. It's a natural transition." Brandon, still smirking, chimed in, "Don't worry, brother. I won't screw it up. Just a little refresher course for me." I should have argued. I should have unleashed everything that was churning inside me. But I didn't. I nodded. I even managed a tight, fake smile. Then I walked out of that office, my stomach a writhing mess of anxiety and confusion. The next few days were a blur of internal negotiation. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe Dad didn't mean it that way. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't a joint plan, it was a demotion. Brandon was being handed my life's work without so much as a discussion, and I was being shunted into some vague, nebulous strategy. Role. Here's the thing about this kind of betrayal: it's not just about the job. In many family businesses, professional identity and personal worth become inextricably linked. A demotion isn't just a change in title, it's a profound psychological blow, an erosion of self-esteem that can lead to feelings of displacement and a loss of purpose, often compounded by the emotional complexity of parental favoritism. What I found next changed everything. Brandon, meanwhile, swaggered around the office like he owned the place, asking interns where the energy drinks were kept and flashing a new, ridiculously expensive wristwatch as if it were a crucial tool for freight management. I kept waiting for Dad to explain, to pull me aside and say, "Jack, you're still the anchor here. This is just temporary." That conversation never happened. Instead, Brandon got a new, plush office. Mine was repainted without my knowledge, a surprise I discovered when I almost tripped over a stack of Amazon boxes containing gaming chairs and Edied strips. My nameplate simply vanished. I wish I could say that's when I snapped, that I stormed into the boardroom and flipped a table. But I swallowed it. I kept everything running. I was the first one in, the last one out, answering Brandon's clueless questions, solving problems he didn't even know existed. I did it because I loved the company. Maybe I just didn't know who I was without it. Then came the second blow, and this one felt profoundly personal. Brandon lasted precisely 8 days before making his first catastrophic mistake. He carelessly terminated a long-standing contract with Shannon Freight Lines, a family-run trucking firm that had been with us since before I could drive. They were our biggest client, but they were loyal, unwavering. Shannon stood by us every winter when other companies canceled due to bad weather. We had handshake agreements built on decades of mutual respect. And Brandon, in his infinite wisdom, lost their trust. He'd optimized their route using some pricey third-party AI scheduler he'd found on a SaaS marketplace, sending their truck straight into a storm zone. 2 trucks slid off the road. One driver was hospitalized with a fractured leg. Shannon's owner, Claire Sullivan, called me directly, her voice laced with justifiable fury. When I tried to smooth things over, I saw Brandon had already sent them an email. A GIF. A crazy shrugging GIF with the words, "We're live and learn." I felt a burning humiliation. I immediately called Dad, pacing the asphalt lot behind the building, the cold air doing little to cool the rage simmering beneath my skin. "Dad, this is a disaster! We could lose Shannon! They literally work like emergency room drivers!" And Brandon responded with a GIF, a GF, Dad. There was a beat of silence on the other end, then Dad's voice, slow and measured. "He's learning. Give him some slack." I actually laughed, a bit of hollow sound. "You would have had my head if I'd done that at 26? His voice hardened, chilling the already cold air. "You're not 26, you're 32. You should be able to handle your brother's inexperience." That was the moment it crystallized. This wasn't about giving Brandon an opportunity. This was about making me carry him. This situation highlights the sunk cost fallacy in action, where a father, having invested emotionally and professionally in his favored son, doubles down on that investment even when evidence points to failure. The reluctance to admit a mistake often leads to irrational decisions, sacrificing long-term stability for short-term emotional comfort, and places an unfair burden on others. And the slow erosion of my position continued. The next week, I saw subtle but deliberate shifts. Reports I used to review were now routed directly to Brandon. Clients I'd managed for years were subtly transferred to him. My email access was mysteriously limited, a system glitch, they claimed. I was conveniently left out of an investor teleconference, only discovering it when I spotted "Quarterly Update with Lead Operator" on Brandon's calendar. Lead operator. That was my title until very recently. One day at lunch, I approached Dad. We were at our usual Greek restaurant, the kind of place where we'd shared countless souvlaki and inside jokes over the years. But this time, his face was all business. I put my fork down, the food suddenly tasteless. "I need to ask you something. Am I being phased out?" He didn't even blink. "Not phased out, just repositioned. Corporate speak." "You mean phased out?" I countered. "Jack, don't be theatrical. You're still part of the vision." Brandon just brings a new perspective. He's young tech savvy. Investors appreciate that. But he doesn't know the business. I wanted to shout. He doesn't respect it. He's playing office like it's a TikTok trend. Dad exhaled, leaning back. "You've had your time, Jack. Perhaps it's time to stand aside and let someone else take a shot." Had my time. Like I was an old machine slated for the scrap heap. Like I was a relic. I left lunch early, the food untouched. That night, I stayed late at the empty office. The lights were out, only the low hum of the vending machine breaking the silence. I wandered the floor like a ghost, my fingers trailing over the workstations, the whiteboard still covered in the day's scribbles, the conference room chairs still warm from debates and coffee, fueled brainstorming. My fingerprints were everywhere. I had helped build this place. Now I felt like a stranger in my own home. And then, the breaking point. It happened 3 days later. I walked into the office to find my true team, the people I'd hired and trained, the people who worked harder than anyone, huddled around Brandon in the break room. He was holding a box of cupcakes, a triumphant grin on his face. "Promotion cupcakes," he announced. "Dad made it official. I'm Chief of Operations?" I blinked. The room fell silent as they saw me. Someone even shifted as if I'd stumbled into the wrong party. I stared at Brandon. "What?" he asked, as if genuinely confused. "Oh yeah, Dad was going to tell you. Last-minute decision. But I'm officially in charge of operations now." "Pretty sweet, huh?" I didn't move. Didn't say a word. I just turned and walked straight into my father's office. He looked up from his laptop, utterly unsurprised to see me. "You made him Chief of Operations?" I asked, My voice calm, unnervingly quiet. You couldn't even look me in the eye when you did it. He closed his laptop lid. It was going to happen eventually. Better to rip off the band-aid. I shook my head, a bitter taste in my mouth. You don't rip a band-aid off someone who's bleeding out. You fix them up first. This is a business decision, he stated, his voice flat. No, I countered. It's a family decision, masquerading as a business decision, and you didn't even bother with the disguise. He stood, walking around the desk. Jack, if this is about titles or ego, it's about respect. I pointed to the door. He never worked the night shift, never lost sleep over a delayed shipment. He didn't know what net 30 meant until this week. Dad's expression tightened, his eyes narrowing. You are not to question my judgments. This is my firm. You work here because I allow you to. There it was. Unvarnished. 9 years of work commitment and sacrifice, reduced to a privilege, a favor he'd begrudgingly granted. Then let me make things easy. I said, my heart hammering against but my voice unwavering. I resign. His eyebrows shot up. Are you serious? You said I had my time. I replied, fine. Enjoy the future. And I walked out. No smashing doors, no dramatic pronouncements, just a quiet, deliberate exit into the biting, bitter air. I didn't sleep that night. My phone buzzed incessantly, concerned friends, bewildered coworkers. Brandon even sent a meme person waving goodbye with the caption, "Don't let the door hit ya." I ignored it all, staring at the ceiling until dawn, wondering who I was without that company, without that legacy. But the problem with being underestimated, with being dismissed as yesterday's news, is that people eventually stop watching you. They assume you're out of the game, and that's when you make your move. Because that company didn't run on spreadsheets and meetings alone. It ran on people, and I knew exactly where the fault lines were. The day after I resigned, everything was eerily still. No frantic meetings, no calendar notifications, no sound of Brandon's dreadful lo-fi rhythms bleeding from my old office. I sat at my kitchen table, a hoodie pulled tight, staring at a cold cup of coffee and an untouched breakfast sandwich. The silence was deafening. For 9 years, my mornings had been a fire drill of client calls and urgent deliveries. Now I was home, unemployed, turning 33 next month, with no backup plan and no idea what came next. I'd love to tell you I leaped out of bed, fired up and ready to conquer the world, but that would be a lie. I spiraled a little. The first week was a haze of Netflix, takeout, and ignoring calls from people I wasn't ready to face. My apartment, once a pit stop between 12-hour workdays, started to feel like a cage. I was restless, furious, and profoundly lost. My father's words echoed in my head. You work here because I allow you to. As if everything I'd done meant nothing. As if I was a glorified intern whose existence he merely tolerated. The toughest part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the identity crisis. For years I was the company. People respected me, trusted my judgment. Now, I was just a man in sweats watching reruns of a cooking show I didn't even enjoy. The worst part was imagining Brandon, feet up on my old desk, acting like he'd earned it. But slowly, painfully, something inside me began to shift. It started with a text from Tyler, our head of fleet maintenance. 5 words: you didn't deserve that, dude. That one message cracked something open. Others trickled in over the next few days. Sophia from accounting, Olivia from customer service, even a couple of our younger dispatchers. They all said similar things. The company felt different. Things were getting sloppy. Brandon was outsourcing simple tasks he didn't understand. Morale was abysmal. At first, I didn't know what to do with the information. I wasn't going to beg for my job back. But something else was brewing, something quieter than outrage, something more focused. If they didn't want me at their table, I'd build my own. The idea struck me at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was scrolling through job boards, feeling utterly defeated, when I saw an ad for a freight brokerage training program. I didn't need the program, I could teach it, but it ignited a spark. What if I didn't try to join another company? What if I started one? The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I knew the logistics industry inside and out. I knew the inefficiencies. I knew which clients were overcharged, which drivers were underpaid. I knew who felt overlooked, who longed for better treatment, and who would follow me if I offered something real. I didn't need a building or a warehouse, not yet. Just a laptop, a phone, and a plan. That night, I opened a blank document and labeled it Phase 1. From a psychological perspective, this pivot represents a critical act of self-reclamation. After experiencing a profound blow to one's professional identity, creating something entirely new becomes an adaptive coping mechanism, transforming passive resentment into active agency and rebuilding self-worth through tangible achievement. But that was only the beginning of the journey. I started reaching out, gently. I wasn't poaching, not yet. I just wanted to know what people needed. I called Shannon Freight Lines first. They still hadn't renewed their contract with my father's firm after Brandon's debacle. The owner sounded exhausted when she picked up. "Jack, is that you?" she asked. "It's me," I replied, just checking in. "Heard about the driver. Is he okay?" She sighed. "Broken femur. Recovering, but it'll be a long road." I paused. "If you're still looking at logistics partners, I'm working on something. Nothing formal yet, but if I built something better, smaller, more attentive, would you be interested?" There was a long silence. "Then, you built it, Jack, and I'll be your first client." That was all I needed. I leveraged my limited savings and a small personal loan from my old college roommate, Adam, to form my own LLC, Forge Logistics. It felt symbolic. I wasn't inheriting anything. I was forging something new from scratch. The next few weeks were hellish. I worked from a folding table in my tiny living room. No secretary, no admin, no expensive CRM software. Just spreadsheets, phone calls, and pure, unadulterated willpower. I struck agreements with independent drivers I'd met over the years. I used open source tech to build a basic online portal for tracking shipments. Every invoice, every call, every client request, I handled it. It was grueling, but it was mine. The funny thing about starting fresh is how people suddenly see you differently. Old colleagues who'd once dismissed me as Mr. Reliable now saw an underdog. And people love an underdog, especially one with a shared grievance. Within 8 weeks, I had 4 clients. Not massive contracts, but respectable ones. Companies that had felt neglected under Brandon's leadership. One even forwarded me an email where Brandon tried to use ChatGPT to generate a shipping schedule and ended up with a completely nonsensical freight route. I didn't laugh, but I did save a screenshot. It wasn't all triumphs, though. I made mistakes. One day I forgot to schedule a follow-up with a client and almost lost the business. Another time, my Wi-Fi died during a Zoom pitch, forcing me to deliver a presentation from a Starbucks parking lot in the pouring rain. I learned the hard way that running your own show meant taking full, absolute responsibility for every win and every setback. But that was the difference now. I owned it. I wasn't a stand-in for some golden boy with an Instagram addiction. I was the person in the arena. Then came the day I saw Brandon in public for the first time since I left. I was walking out of a supply store, arms full of ink cartridges for my printer, when I spotted him across the parking lot sliding into his new Audi. He didn't see me, or maybe he did and just didn't care. But something about the way he adjusted his fancy sunglasses before starting the engine ignited a slow burn inside me. He still thought he'd won. I could have just walked away, but I didn't. Instead, I got back in my car, pulled out my notepad, and started jotting down a list. Not just of people, but of systems, of flaws, of vendors my father's company had mistreated. Clients who had fled, drivers who had been burned. I wasn't about to sabotage them. That wasn't the idea. The idea was to outwork and outlast them. Because while Brandon was busy refining his LinkedIn profile and showing off at business expos, I was in the trenches, rebuilding from the ground up. And every contract I signed, every email I wrote, every mile driven by one of my partner drivers moved me closer to what? To a day I hadn't allowed myself to envision yet. Brandon would eventually learn that respect can't be inherited, that loyalty isn't automatic, that you can't fake leadership with cupcake parties and onion titles. And that trying to replace someone who built the system without understanding how it works was a recipe for spectacular failure. By month 3, Forge Logistics wasn't just surviving, it was flourishing. 8 regular clients, 2 part-time virtual assistants, and a tight-knit group of freelance drivers who genuinely enjoyed working with me. We weren't flashy. No neon signs, no company-branded pens, but we were agile, reliable, and honest. No AI-generated schedules, no tone-deaf memes, no clueless executives attending synergy meetings, while trucks sat idle. I had systems. I had discipline. Most importantly, I had trust. And that's when I started to think bigger. It wasn't just about scale anymore. It was about retribution. I hadn't prepared for it. Not at first. For the first 2 months, I was too deep in survival mode, trying to prove to myself that walking away wasn't crazy. But success has a funny way of clarifying your vision. And as the clamor in my head subsided, all I could see were the fissures appearing in the empire I once served. It began with whispers, faint gossip from former coworkers who still checked in occasionally. Brandon was cutting corners, outsourcing too much. He'd hired a social media manager before bothering to update the ancient shipping tracking system. One of my new drivers, formerly from Dad's company, told me he'd had to pay for a fuel reimbursement out of his own pocket because Brandon's team couldn't get the paperwork straight. But the real opportunity arrived 3 weeks later. I was having lunch with Sophia, an accounting legend as sharp as a scalpel, and one of the few people from the old company I still trusted. We'd stayed in touch. She hadn't picked sides when I left, but she hadn't been shy about calling Brandon a puppy trying to manage a farm. We met at a little ramen joint, halfway between her office and my apartment. She looked tired, anxious in a way I hadn't seen before. "Things are bad," she explained, barely letting me sit down. "And I mean bad bad." I raised an eyebrow. "Worse than the Shannon Freight Line catastrophe." She didn't laugh. That worried me. They lost 2 huge contracts last week. One of them was Burwood Construction. Brandon promised them a fleet upgrade he couldn't deliver. And guess what? They pulled everything. Full exit. Burwood. I repeated, genuinely shocked. That's 30% of the revenue. Sophia imported supplies were included. It was closer to 40%. Guess who Brandon blamed? I didn't respond. I already knew. Me, she stated plainly. I overestimated the financial allotment for equipment refreshment. Never mind that I'd warned him 3 times, in writing. He forwarded the emails to Dad, but he deleted the warnings. I stared at her. "He edited your emails." She nodded, her eyes sad. "And your father believed him. Or at least, pretended to." That's when something clicked. They weren't just in over their heads. They were desperate. In business, and particularly in situations involving family conflict, the manipulation of information and deliberate misdirection, often seen in practices like gaslighting or selective communication, isn't just unethical, it creates a fragile and unsustainable foundation. Over time, such actions erode trust and expose a company to significant operational and reputational risks, often leading to a complete breakdown when critical decisions are based on falsehoods rather than facts. What I needed next was leverage. That night, I sat at my desk for hours, phone face down, staring at a spreadsheet that wasn't financial. It was a list of people, of trends, of pressure points. It was time to stop surviving. It was time to strike, but not foolishly, not emotionally. If I was going to take down the empire that had cast me aside, I needed to be smart, surgical. So I started laying the groundwork. First, stage information. I already had a solid network. Former clients, former coworkers, even vendors who were tired of dealing with Brandon's influencer energy, as one supplier put it. But I needed more than complaints. I needed leverage. So I reached out to Marco. Marco had been the company's chief systems administrator for over a decade. The quiet guy, usually wearing the same gray hoodie. Severely underpaid, almost invisible to the new leadership. I had always treated him with respect, brought him coffee during server downtime, sat with him through late-night security upgrades. We weren't close, but there was trust. I met him at a dimly lit pub on a Thursday night, the kind of place where the music is too low and the drinks are too strong. "Heard you're doing your own thing now," he said, taking a sip of neat whiskey. "I am," I replied, "and I heard you're dealing with Brandon's tech meltdowns." Marco smirked. "The man thinks HTML is a form of cloud storage." We both laughed, a genuine, albeit strained laugh. Then I leaned in. "I need help." My voice dropped to a near whisper. "I'm not asking you to do anything illegal, but if you happen to know about any vulnerabilities in the system, or backups of deleted documents, or, I don't know, internal audit logs from the last quarter." He tilted his head. "Exactly. Hypothetically, he didn't say yes, but 3 days later, a secure zip file appeared in my inbox, the lunch meet notes, inside gold, exported email chains, transaction logs, client communications, mistakes hushed up, promises made and never kept. Even a voice recording of Brandon yelling at someone over the phone, calling a client a boomer with trucker brain, because they dared to question his modernism. I didn't do anything with it yet. That wasn't the point. The point was control. The next phase. Clients, I started having quiet coffees, dinners, parking lot conversations. No pressure, no hard pitches. Just let me know if you ever need something different. Some were curious. A few were already vaguely aware of Forge. But what I needed was a tipping point, and it came from an unexpected source, a woman named Natalie Haynes. Natalie was the procurement manager for a medium-sized agricultural supply chain I'd worked with previously. Outspoken, aggressive, allergic to corporate BS. We'd had a massive argument once over a late shipment, but we'd resolved it fairly, which she respected. She called me out of the blue. "Heard you weren't dead?" She clipped. "Not yet," I said. "Trying to stay that way." "I have a problem," she went on. "Your brother promised me a 3-day turnaround for animal feed supplies. It took 6. Then he had the audacity to suggest we adjust our expectations because he was changing the paradigm. What the hell does that even mean?" "It means he's drowning," I explained, "and he's pretending it's performance art." She laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Email me your pricing. If you can promise delivery in 5 days or less, you've got our business." That was the crack I needed. I poured everything I had into delivering for her, nailing every delivery, sending regular check-ins, personalized updates. Natalie was impressed, and Natalie had friends. Within 3 weeks, 3 of her industry connections called, all told similar stories. Everyone was desperate for something better. Word began to spread. Brandon didn't notice at first. He was too busy posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn about rising from the ashes and organizing corporate ping pong tournaments. But Dad noticed. I know this because he called me, out of nowhere. "Jack," he said, his voice careful. "I hear you're working with some of our clients." "They're not your clients," I explained quietly. "They're clients. They go where the service is." A heavy pause. "You understand this isn't a game. You're burning bridges." "No," I replied. "You did that when you chose a slogan on a sweatshirt over the person who built your foundation." He exhaled. "I never intended for it to be this way." "Then you shouldn't have lit the match." I hung up. Then I accelerated. I launched a new client portal, hired another assistant, paid my drivers above market rates, treating them like partners, not cogs. The final piece of my setup: visibility. I contacted a local business podcast I knew. They owed me a favor for a guest speaker appearance I'd done 2 years prior. I pitched them a story: a son who left his family company to build his own. They loved it. We taped the episode in 1 take. I didn't mention names. I didn't disparage anyone. I just told the truth: how loyalty isn't always reciprocal, how leadership is earned, not given, how vision is meaningless without execution. The episode aired the next week. By the following Monday, my inbox had 70 fresh inquiries. Brandon's firm experienced its worst quarter in 6 years. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because all of this, the growth, the planning, the leverage, that was just the beginning. The big move was about to happen. And this time, it wasn't just for business. It was personal. It happened on a Tuesday, and it wasn't an accident. I picked the day on purpose. Midweek, quiet, and right before my father's company's quarterly review meeting. The exact kind of meeting I used to run, the kind Brandon once failed to schedule until 15 minutes before it started, blaming an or male filter issue. 8 months had passed since I walked out of that office with nothing but my pride and a resounding quiet in my chest. 8 months of building from zero, of watching Brandon bumble through my old role, burning bridges faster than he could build them. Dad had stood behind him, arms folded, as if everything was fine. But suddenly, deeply, something was very wrong. Forge Logistics had exploded. We were no longer the scrappy underdog. We were the real deal. 20 clients, a warehouse lease in the works, 2 modest delivery fleets under contract, a dedicated team of dispatchers and planners, and a reputation we didn't advertise. We didn't need to. Our work spoke for itself. Brandon's firm, my father's firm, was hemorrhaging. They'd lost nearly half their long-term contracts. 2 major investors had pulled out. Their driver retention was at an all-time low, and their books were a chaotic mess. Brandon simply couldn't grasp the convoluted web of overlapping vendor agreements, variable payment terms, and sloppy invoicing. They were vulnerable, but I didn't want to kick them when they were down, not in an obvious way. I preferred something more lyrical. So I asked my dad to lunch. He was surprised to hear from me. "I didn't expect this," he said, when we sat down at the same Greek restaurant, where we'd had dozens of meals, and where he told me I'd had enough. "Thought we should talk," I remarked nonchalantly, biting into my gyro. "See how things are going," he said softly. "Brandon's been adjusting." I didn't react. I gave him a tight lip smile. He looked up. "I've heard about Forge. You're doing great. Better than great," I answered. "We're growing." He shifted uneasily. I could see it in his eyes, the creeping awareness that I wasn't there for a nostalgic chat. I was there to show him. "I wanted to offer something," I said. When I mentioned, way out, he raised an eyebrow. "A way out of what? Your mess?" I replied bluntly. "You lost over $1.5 million in contracts this quarter. Your investors are nervous. Your employee churn is hurting your operational consistency. And Brandon isn't a leader. He's a liability." His jaw tensed, but he didn't interrupt. "I'm willing to buy out 2 of your largest remaining accounts. They've already approached me, by the way. They just didn't want to jump without knowing how clean the split would be. I'll make it as painless and as generous as possible. You can take the cash and reorganize what's left, rebrand, whatever. It doesn't matter to me." "You're trying to gut us?" he remarked quietly. "No," I responded. "I'm giving you a chance to save anything. Because if I wanted to gut you, I'd just let Brandon continue." We sat in silence for a moment. My father looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his expression that wasn't arrogance or contempt. I saw dread. But he wasn't ready to accept defeat. "Not yet. I'll talk to Brandon," he responded stiffly. "We'll consider your offer." "Do that," I said, nodding. But I already knew he wouldn't. So I prepared for the final push. It started with the leap. I forwarded the materials Marco had provided me, the damning email chains, transaction logs, and audio recordings, to one of the remaining investors, but not anonymously. I signed my name and added a cover letter gently expressing my concerns about mismanagement, incompetence, and ethical red flags that jeopardized not just operational success, but legal stability. The investor replied within hours. "Thank you for your transparency," he wrote. "We will perform an internal audit promptly." The following morning, 3 top staff members quit. Brandon posted a vague, optimistic LinkedIn status about reorganizing with purpose. The next week, 2 more clients jumped ship and joined Forge. Then came the board meeting. I wasn't invited, and I didn't need to be there. Sophia was. She texted me after it was over. "He's gone. They're removing Brandon from operations." Board voted 4-1. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because of the single individual who still voted for Brandon. Dad went down with the ship, even though it was already taking on water. But Brandon didn't leave quietly. 3 days later, he arrived at my office. He stormed in like a character from a bad comedy, crimson in the face, practically vibrating with rage. My crew halted mid-call, startled by the intrusion. I stood quietly, motioned for him to step into the hallway, and then closed the glass door behind us, the sound muffling the office chatter. "You think you've won?" he snarled, his voice tight. "You think this is yours now?" I looked at him, and all I saw was a boy, drowning in a pool he'd never been trained to swim in. "I don't have to think it," I said, my voice steady, devoid of emotion. "I built it. You tried to play founder, and you got buried inside the first 8 months. That's not winning or losing." Sabotage me," he accused, his voice rising. "No," I said quietly. "You sabotaged yourself. I just stopped saving you." He opened his mouth to reply, but I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there in a stillness thick with defeat. After that, the consequences spread quickly. The audit results were made public within a month. Investors sued for deception. Clients demanded refunds. Vendors cut ties. Dad tried to regain control, but the damage was irreversible. They sold off whatever assets they could, reduced the workforce to a skeleton crew, and the company was shuttered within 3 months. No news releases, no dramatic headlines, just a quiet emptiness. Where a firm had stood, there was now only a ghost. I didn't dance on the grave, post cryptic social media remarks, or brag during interviews. That wasn't the point. The point was clarity, freedom, and truth. One evening, I sat in my new office, a genuine office now, not a folding table. Water spilled from outside my door as my team shared snacks and stories. My whiteboard was covered in ideas, expansion plans, and client names I'd fought tooth and nail to win. My phone vibrated. It was a message from Dad. I didn't know how to let go. You were right. I just wasn't ready to admit it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I flipped the phone face down, leaned back in my chair, and smiled, because I wasn't craving his approval anymore. He had his legacy now, and I had mine, and I built it from scratch. What do you believe is the true cost of unearned loyalty, both for the person giving it and the person receiving it? The story you just heard is a powerful illustration of complex psychological and social dynamics often at play in family businesses and competitive environments. Jack's experience, from the emotional impact of professional demotion and identity crisis, to his strategic navigation of betrayal and rebuilding, offers invaluable lessons. We saw the destructive force of nepotism and unchecked entitlement in Brandon's actions, leading to the Dunning-Kruger effect, where incompetence is met with overconfidence. His father's adherence to the sunk cost fallacy, continuing to invest in a failing venture due to prior emotional investment, demonstrates how deeply personal biases can override sound business judgment, ultimately jeopardizing an entire enterprise. Jack, on the other hand, exemplified the strength of social capital and strategic resilience. His ability to maintain positive relationships even amidst personal turmoil, and his methodical approach to gathering leverage, highlights how ethical breaches and a lack of integrity can be weaponized against a business. The narrative underscores that while tangible assets are crucial, intangible assets like trust, respect, and a strong professional network are often the true pillars of long-term success. Understanding these dynamics can empower you, whether you're facing career challenges, navigating family relationships, or building your own entrepreneurial path. If you found these insights compelling, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced or witnessed similar psychological battles in your professional or personal life? What did you learn from them? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the human stories behind everyday struggles and triumphs.